It was 3:12 a.m. on December 11, 1978, when a quiet hum of diesel engines broke the silence at JFK Airport. 6 men, masked and wired with adrenaline, slipped through the terminal shadows like ghosts with a purpose. They weren't after jewelry or artwork. They weren't amateurs. What they sought was cash. Millions of untraceable dollars flown in from overseas. Within 64 minutes, they would vanish with $5.875 million, the largest cash theft in American history at the time. But the real twist, they would all start dying, one by one. This isn't fiction. This is the bloodstained legend of the Lufthansa Heist. At the heart of it all, a wise guy named Henry Hill, whose mouth would do more damage than any Tommy gun ever could. The Lufthansa Heist is the stuff of legends.
Masks run up to the gate of a Lufthansa cargo bay in New York at 3 in
A meticulously planned heist, an inside man and a group of criminals with ties to the infamous Lucchese crime family. It was masterminded by Jimmy the Gent Burke, a ruthless but sharp mobster who trusted few and betrayed many. He had connections, he had the know-how, and he had a crew of loyal thieves willing to pull off the impossible. The robbery targeted Lufthansa's Air Cargo Terminal 261 at JFK Airport, a secure place where millions of dollars in cash and valuables were shipped in regularly from overseas, particularly from Germany. The money and jewels were supposed to be distributed to various parts of the country, but on that fateful December night, they would never leave. The plot began with insiders like Louis Werner, a crooked airport worker drowning in gambling debts, who whispered secrets to the wrong ears. Werner, desperate to pay off his debts, shared sensitive information about Lufthansa's cargo operations with the wrong people. This would become the catalyst for one of the most audacious robberies in history. But the heist wasn't the only thing that would make this crime unforgettable. It was the aftermath, the series of murders, betrayals, and eventual downfall of many involved that would turn the Lufthansa heist into a symbol of Mafia greed. At the heart of the Lufthansa heist was a crew of highly skilled, deeply loyal criminals, each with their own motivations, but all united by one goal: millions of dollars. The mastermind was Jimmy the Gent Burke, a cold, calculating mobster who had built a reputation for being ruthless. His success wasn't just due to his ability to plan meticulously. It was the ability to eliminate anyone who posed a threat, even if that threat was only imagined. To Burke, suspicion was as dangerous as betrayal, and he was willing to murder over the slightest sign of disloyalty. Burke's right-hand man was Henry Hill, the one who connected all the pieces of the operation, a mid-level associate with a big mouth and even bigger appetite for chaos. By the time he was recruited by the Lucchese family, Hill had already served as a bagman, a hustler, and a hijacker. Hill was the bridge between Burke's strategic genius and the rougher elements of the crime world. As a fixer and go-between, Hill knew everyone from low-level hustlers to powerful mob bosses. He wasn't a made man, but he had earned the trust and respect of those who mattered.
of other gangsters for his silence. Burke took a liking to him due to their shared ancestry. His career within the mob would only grow.
His role was crucial. He was the one who kept everything running smoothly, from organizing the heist to ensuring the getaway plan went off without a hitch. But even Burke and Hill needed muscle, and for that, they turned to Tommy DeSimone, a violent psychopath who was notorious for his short temper and brutal violence. DeSimone, who would later be immortalized as Joe Pesci's character in Goodfellas, was a man everyone feared, known for his hair-trigger temper and penchant for killing at the slightest provocation. Tommy was the enforcer, the man who would make sure no one stood in their way. His ruthlessness would soon leave a bloody trail, not from just the heist, but from the countless murders he committed to cover up loose ends. The crew also included Louis Werner, an insider at JFK Airport, whose role was crucial in providing the insider information that made the heist possible. Werner, an airport worker drowning in gambling debts of $20,000, saw the Lufthansa cargo operation as his ticket to freedom. He knew that about once a month, the airline flew in large amounts of cash, which had been exchanged in Germany by American servicemen and tourists. This cash was stored in the airport's vault until the following day, when it was picked up and taken to the bank. Werner realized that he could use this information to make a fortune, suggesting to his bookmaker associate, Martin Krugman, that it would be possible to steal millions of dollars from the vault. He traded security for survival, feeding vital information to Burke's crew. It was Werner's betrayal that opened the doors to the jackpot of millions of dollars in untraceable cash and jewelry. Alongside Werner, there were others like Angelo Seppi and Joe Manry, men with specialized skills. Seppi was an expert in logistics, while Manry was the muscle who could intimidate or eliminate everyone who threatened the plan. They were essential to the heist, executing their parts with military precision. But the crew wasn't just a group of skilled criminals. They were a family, a team that relied on each other to pull off the impossible. The plan began to take shape at Robert's Lounge, a tavern located in the Ozone Park neighborhood of Queens, owned by Jimmy Burke. The lounge was more than just a place to grab a drink. It was a hub for criminals, a place where dirty deals were made and conversations turned into schemes. One evening at Robert's Lounge, Henry Hill met with Martin Krugman, a bookmaker who had been brought in on Werner's suggestion. They discussed the logistics of the robbery and the enormous potential payoff. It was here that the heist, which would go down in history as one of the most infamous in American criminal lore, truly began to take shape. The tension was high as they rehearsed and mapped out every detail. They knew the stakes. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect in the underworld. The Mafia didn't tolerate failure, and betrayal meant death. They carefully planned their escape routes, procured a getaway van, and took every precaution to ensure that the heist would go off without a hitch. The crew's precision, Burke's leadership, Hill's connections, and DeSimone's intimidation all came together to make the Lufthansa heist one of the most daring and successful robberies in history. The crew are going to steal $5.875 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry, an amount that would forever be etched in criminal folklore. But despite their best efforts, the price of their success would soon become clear. The cost of betrayal in the Mafia is death. No one involved in the heist would walk away unscathed. This wasn't pocket change. There were millions of US dollars flown in from Germany weekly and stored temporarily in JFK's high-security vaults before being redistributed. Lufthansa didn't publicize the shipments, but Louis Werner, an insider with a gambling problem, had access to the codes, the schedules, and the perfect grudge to exploit. On December 11, 1978, the Lufthansa heist began in the dead of night, just after 3 a.m., when a black Ford Econoline van rolled up to Lufthansa's cargo terminal at JFK Airport. The crew, disguised in airport uniforms, blended in perfectly, looking like employees. Inside the terminal, they were armed with guns, walkie-talkies, and nerves of steel. They immediately bypassed Lufthansa's security system, a series of locks and codes, with shocking ease. There were no alarms, no red flags.
December 11, the 6 robbers drove up to Lufthansa Cargo Building 261 in a black Ford van. A Buick was parked in the terminal parking lot.
They swiftly rounded up the 10 employees working the shift, duct taping their hands and mouths to prevent any alarms from being raised. The crew made it clear they weren't there to harm anyone. They just needed the workers to stay silent. The stolen van was parked outside the terminal, just as planned.
They began taking employees hostage. A senior agent was grabbed and forced into the lunchroom where 5 other employees were forced to lie on the floor, eyes shut.
At 3:12 a.m., a cargo agent named Kerry Whalen noticed the van and approached to investigate. The crew immediately ambushed him, pistol whipping him and dragging him into the van. After stealing his wallet and threatening his family, Whalen had no choice but to cooperate. This marked the beginning of the Lufthansa heist. As Whalen was held hostage, another agent heard the commotion and tried to investigate. However, he too was ambushed when he entered the loading dock, encountering 6 masked and armed men. The men used a key provided by insider Louis Werner, allowing them to enter the building. Once inside, they quickly rounded up the remaining employees and confined them into a break room, making it clear with Whalen's bloodied presence that they were serious. The next step was to access the Lufthansa vault, which was protected by a double-door security system. One of the robbers ordered the senior cargo agent to call Rudy Elric, who, according to Werner, was the only one with the codes to open the vault system. Elric, initially caught off guard, was summoned under the guise of a technical issue with the cargo. He was forced to open the doors, though he was surprised at how much the masked men seemed to know about the security measures. Werner had briefed Burke's men thoroughly, explaining the importance of the double-door system. Any mistake could trigger the alarm and lock down the entire airport in less than 90 seconds. The first door had to be unlocked, opened, then closed and relocked before the second could be opened. Once the cargo was inside the vault's chamber, Elric was forced to lie on the ground at gunpoint as the robbers sifted through the cargo manifests, selecting about 40 parcels to steal. Once they had their haul, Elric was forced to unlock the second door. The stolen goods, $5.8 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry, were loaded into the chamber, and the second door was securely locked again. Elric was then escorted back to the break room under guard, while Burke's men began finalizing their escape. By 4:16 a.m., all of the stolen cargo was loaded into the Econoline van. The Lufthansa employees were instructed not to make any phone calls until 4:30, giving the crew a 15-minute buffer to escape unnoticed. At 4:21 a.m., the Econoline pulled out of the loading dock. True to their word, the employees waited until 4:30 before alerting authorities, giving Burke's men nearly 14 minutes of a head start. By the time the authorities arrived, there was no trace of Burke's crew. The heist had been completed successfully, seamlessly, and without a single shot fired. Despite the careful execution of the heist and the crew's quick escape, the authorities soon found themselves struggling to make progress in the investigation, as the Lufthansa heist made international headlines, not just for the enormous amount of money stolen, but for the mystery surrounding the robbers' identities. Despite intense investigations, the authorities were left in the dark about the perpetrators. The crew remained hidden for a long time, partly due to the fact that most of the people involved in the heist were silenced soon after. On December 13, 1978, just 2 days after the robbery, police received a tip about a large van parked in a no parking zone in Canarsie, Brooklyn. The van, described by a patrol officer, matched the description of the getaway vehicle seen by Lufthansa employees at the terminal. The police rushed to the scene and impounded the Ford Econoline van. After examining the footprints inside, investigators discovered they belonged to Parnell Stacks Edwards, one of the robbers. However, Edwards was never questioned by the police, as the investigation quickly shifted focus elsewhere. Edwards, along with many others involved in the heist, would never be brought to justice for their role in the robbery. While the investigation faltered and the authorities struggled to connect the dots, the real consequences of the heist were unfolding behind closed doors. What followed the heist was not the triumphant celebration the crew had hoped for, but a nightmare for everyone involved. Jimmy Burke, ruthless and paranoid, knew something that most of the men involved didn't. The fewer who knew, the better. In Mafia culture, loyalty was sacred, but there was also a deep-seated fear of betrayal. So Burke did what Burke did best. He cleaned house. Within months, the bodies began piling up. Joe Manry and Paolo Licastri, who had been involved in organizing the getaway, were found shot in the back of the head. Their bodies burned and disposed in a car. Thomas DeSimone, the mobster with the violent streak, disappeared. His body was never found, and it's suspected that he was killed for his impulsiveness. Other members of the crew were similarly killed to silence them. Parnell Stacks Edwards, one of the robbers involved in the heist, was killed simply for leaving the getaway van unattended. His one task was to dispose of the van, but instead he got high and illegally parked it in Brooklyn before he went to his girlfriend's apartment and went high.
A man named Parnell Stacks Edwards was going to discard the van following the heist.
Burke's paranoia reached its peak as he saw this as an unforgivable mistake. Edwards' body was found dumped in a field, a stark reminder of the Mafia's brutal code of silence.
He drove to his girlfriend's apartment and got high instead, and the police connected the vehicle to the robbery. As a result, Burke had DeSimone and Sepe go to his apartment one morning and shoot him in the back of the head. Next up was Krugman. Krugman, who ran a wig store and illegal lottery operations, was very pushy when it came to money.
He wasn't the only one to meet his fate. Angelo Seppi, Krugman, and others involved were eliminated in rapid succession. The cost of this seemingly perfect crime was becoming unbearable for Burke, and anyone who posed a threat, no matter how small, was swiftly silenced. One by one, the crew vanished. Jimmy was silencing potential leaks. Dead men don't talk. But the biggest casualty of all was Henry Hill. Unlike the others, he wasn't killed. Instead, he found himself on the wrong side of the law when he was arrested on drug trafficking charges in 1980.
In 1980, however, he was arrested on account of a narcotics charge, something that scared him to death. It wasn't the jail time or legal penalties that worried him, it was Burke.
Faced with decades in prison, Hill made a decision that would reverberate through the mob world. He flipped. Hill entered the witness protection program, becoming an FBI informant and offering up every detail about the Lufthansa heist, the murders, the drug dealings, and the inner workings of the Lucchese crime family. His testimony was critical, leading to the convictions of 50 Mafia members, including Jimmy Burke, who was convicted on unrelated charges such as the 1979 murder of a drug dealer and ultimately died in prison. Paul Vario, the Lucchese capo, was also sentenced due to Hill's revelations. But when it came to the Lufthansa heist itself, technically, no one was ever convicted for the robbery. As for the stolen cash, it vanished. Most of it likely laundered or spent. The bodies of those involved, many, still remain missing, their fate sealed by the Mafia's unyielding code of silence. After his testimony, Hill, along with his wife Karen and their 2 children, entered the witness protection program. However, Hill couldn't quite keep the low-profile lifestyle required of the program. In 1987, he was kicked out for his inability to follow the rules. In 1989, Karen divorced him, just a year before Goodfellas hit theaters. Hill spent the next 25 years reveling in the fame the film brought him, making appearances and milking the notoriety of his mobster past. When he died in 2015, none of his remaining Mafia associates showed up at his funeral. While Vario and Burke both went to prison following Hill's cooperation, neither conviction had anything to do with the Lufthansa heist. Vario was arrested for racketeering, gambling, and loan sharking, while Burke was in prison for his involvement in a basketball point-shaving scandal. Both men died behind bars, Vario in 1988 and Burke in 1996. In a strange twist, nearly 36 years after the Lufthansa heist, it seemed another arrest might finally bring someone directly involved to justice. In 2014, Vincent Osorio, the crime chief of the Bonanno family, was arrested in connection with the heist at the age of 78. He went to trial, but ultimately denied any involvement in the robbery, a claim Henry Hill himself backed up before his death in 2012. With Jimmy Burke having murdered nearly all the perpetrators of the robbery, there was almost no one left to prosecute, even if they had been caught. To this day, 40 years after the Lufthansa heist, only one man has ever served time for direct involvement with the crime: Louis Werner, the insider who gave up critical information about the airport's layout. Werner was arrested 4 months after the heist, convicted in May 1979, and served 15 years in prison for his role in the robbery. The story of the Lufthansa heist and Henry Hill's role in it would eventually make its way to Hollywood. In 1990, Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas was released. The film captured the essence of Henry Hill's life, though it left out the Lufthansa heist for legal and personal reasons. Joe Pesci's portrayal of Tommy DeSimone, the cold-blooded mobster, made the movie iconic. However, the true weight of the Lufthansa heist, its violence and betrayals, could only be fully understood by those who lived it. The Lufthansa heist is more than a headline or a movie reference. It was the ultimate mob